Hello everyone, welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program 2 video, and look, the video is not like an hour long, which means that there must have been no significant Kraken attacks. Maybe that's because we finally managed to slay the Kraken in the Eve video. After all, we are professional Kraken slayers, representing that merch there. I'm just milking this merchandise for all it's worth, whilst the Kraken is still so prevalent in Kerbal Space Program 2. But today's mission actually went fairly well, against my internal predictions that it probably wouldn't, because we're launching a kind of ambitious craft. I thought, well, I can't really be bothered to go interplanetary again after the trauma that I've been left with trying to go to Eve. So let's just stick to low Kerbal orbit. So what is an interesting mission that we could do? Well, I'll tell you what. One of my favorite things to do in Kerbal Space Program 2 is build aircraft. I love the procedural wings. They are amazing. They are like the single biggest, bestest thing about this game, in my opinion. And so let's build an interesting aircraft. And to that end, you know, I've already done a space shuttle video. I've already done like a generic Mark II SSTO, but I haven't done an air-launched craft. And air-launched crafts have always kind of historically been quite popular vehicles whenever I showcase them on this YouTube channel. And I really like building them. They're just so fun. There's something really cool and unique about them. And with regard to kind of the options around air launches, we kind of have like two main options, right? We have this kind of air launch vehicle, which in my opinion is my favorite out of the two, where we have this kind of double fuselage aircraft with a really, really big wingspan, and then the payload goes in the center. And then the other option is just a more generic looking aircraft that either deploys the payload from a cargo bay, or the payload is like strapped to the top of the aircraft, something like that. But my aircraft is of the former kind, and specifically it's modelled after White Knight 2, which is the carrier aircraft for Spaceship 2, which is the suborbital spaceplane operated by Virgin Galactic, you know, the one that Richard Branson flew to space in. As you can see at this point in the build time-lapse, I'm currently performing the first test flight. Flight being not the operative word of that sentence. It didn't really get off the ground all that well, and it didn't really stay in the air. We really need to add some canards to the front of the aircraft. So that's what I'm going to do, and go ahead and add now. I should mention that my aircraft is a little bit beefier than the White Knight 2. I think size-wise it's pretty similar, but it has two extra engines. White Knight 2 has two engines on either side. Mine has three engines on either side, because we're going to be carrying a much heavier payload. My spaceplane, that's going to be orbital, baby. We're not going to mess around with suborbital spaceplanes. We're going to go full orbital. So we needed a slightly more capable carrier aircraft. As you can see, second test flight, things are going much, much better. It's pretty maneuverable. I did a nice barrel roll at 5 FPS, and then I thought maybe I can like try and fly it sideways between the VAB and the aircraft control tower, but that did not go very well. But despite the fact that the aircraft crashed horribly and everyone on board died, I was satisfied and was ready to put it into service and create its first orbital payload, which is what I'm building now. Now, I think in an ideal world, I would have attached this to the carrier aircraft via a docking port rather than a decoupler, but I've had a lot of bad experiences with docking ports glitching out in this game, and I've seen a lot of posts on Reddit of docking ports causing all kinds of glitches, so I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to use a radial decoupler to attach the spaceplane to the spaceplane carrier. You can see I'm adding a little cargo bay here. This just contains a couple of reaction wheels, battery, some RTGs as well for power generation, and also a monopropellant tank, because I thought, hey, I don't think reaction wheels are that great in this game. A lot of people tell me as well that really you need monopropellant now, not just rely on SAS wheels. So I added a monopropellant tank, but I then forgot to add any RCS thrusters. So we can't actually make it. It's just dead weight, really. Hey, we can just pretend that that's like, you know, luggage. When people put their suitcases with them, because this is a tourism plane, right? People bring their suitcases and then put them in a non-pressurized cargo bay that's exposed to the vacuum space and they can't access it. But, you know, the thought's there, eh? We could pretend that's like a sort of simulated satellite. This is the first flight. It's got to have a dummy payload, right? So there you go. I didn't forget to add RCS thrusters. That was always the plan, guys. What do you think of the color scheme, by the way, moving away from that? I think it's kind of cool, the blue and the white of the carrier aircraft and the black and the red of the spaceplane. Here, you can see me filming the first flight. I played the footage back very fast because, spoiler alert, it didn't work. Because I couldn't see what the delta V of the spaceplane was in the VAB, because it only shows you kind of your total delta V, I just sort of guessed how much fuel I would need in the spaceplane, and I guessed wrong. So I guess inadvertently, this is an accurate recreation of the Spaceship Two flight plan, right? It goes on a suborbital trajectory, but here at Kraken Slayer Industries, we play for keeps. So we're going back to the VAB now and building Spaceship 3, which has more Methalox tanks on board, so that we should hopefully be able to get to orbit. I once again just guessed and also accidentally repainted the entire craft, so I've got to quickly fix that. But this now, I think, I've added so much more Methalox, this looks like it should work. So we can go ahead and populate all of the command pods and crew modules and get this thing in the air. Just one second, guys, I'm just going to reassure our tourists that we are now on the way.
Hello esteemed guests, good morning and welcome aboard flight number 42069. This is Captain Matt Lowne speaking, and I have some information about our flight. Our flight time today will be 5 hours and 45 minutes, taking off and arriving at the Kraken Slayer Industries Space Center. The weather on our route is good, and the forecast says that it'll be sunny with some patches of cloudiness when we land. We remind you that if you need any special attention, all our crew will be at the ready to assist you. We'll be flying over some interesting places today, such as the island runway, and also everything else on the planet, since we're heading to orbit. As for in-flight entertainment, there'll be a Game Boy Advance with a copy of Wario Land 4 underneath your seats, and lunch can be found in the space where your parachutes would normally be. It's a tin of baked beans and 7 litres of whiskey. In the likely event of emergency or total structural failure of the aircraft, the emergency exit is located above your heads. Unfortunately, you don't have an EVA parachute, so you regrettably will perish upon evacuation, but we hope you have a pleasant fall back down to Kerbin before embracing the eternal blackness of oblivion. But that's it from me for now, so sit back and enjoy the flight.
I think it's nice, just to reassure your guests that you know what you're doing and put them at ease for the flight. Unfortunately, though, this flight will somewhat end in a planned tragedy, because one of the downsides of KSP 1 and KSP 2 is that we can't simultaneously control both aircraft. Maybe this will change when we have multiplayer in KSP 2, but right now we can't. So what I'm going to have to do, just before I deploy the spaceplane, I'm going to make a quick save and then go ahead and launch the spaceplane and lose the carrier aircraft. Once we've got the spaceplane in orbit, I'll do a quick load of the point just before we initially deployed the spaceplane, and then we can fly the carrier aircraft back, and we can just pretend that both survived, but there can only be one. And obviously the spaceplane is the focal point of this video, so I'm afraid the poor Kerbals in the carrier aircraft are not going to survive. So as you can see, I have sped the footage up to be quite a lot faster than real time. I can't remember exactly what percentage. I kind of dynamically changed the speed of the playback, because I can't give you a hard number, but it's definitely it's around 8 times faster than real-time speed right now. I'm going to drop the playback down a little bit just to show you this bug I encountered. Despite the fact that the spaceplane is attached via a decoupler that does not have crossfeed enabled, and there are fuel lines leading from the carrier aircraft to the spaceplane, and that's a one-way fuel line, we still lost some of the methane fuel from the spaceplane. It was being consumed by the jet engines of the carrier, so I just transferred some fuel back into the spaceplane, which I am about to deploy. Here we go. There we are, firing up the engine. Separate! This is always really scary. Look at that. For all its faults, this game just has its beautiful moments. The visuals were stunning. It's obviously a lot nicer watching the footage played back like this, where it's sped up so the frame rate's not as choppy, but still, in the moment, it was very... Oh, I love it.
Hello esteemed guests, this is your captain speaking once again. We have now separated from our carrier aircraft and are now accelerating to orbit under the power of our rocket engine. At this time we advise that you remain seated with your seatbelts on, unless you lost a bet. The total rocket engine burn time will be 2 minutes and 29 seconds, of which 34 seconds have already elapsed. If you are enjoying your flight so far, then don't forget to hit the like button using your feedback interface, and press subscribe to receive notifications from the teams here at Kraken Slayer Industries. That's all from me for now. Enjoy the rest of the ascent.
We really are powering our way through our fuel levels there. We've already burned over half of the fuel there, but we've got enough delta V to circularize just. The numbers are pretty close. Like I say, I eyeballed this, and I didn't do any... This was the first flight of this iteration of this spaceplane, so I wasn't quite sure. At this point, I was like, it looks like the numbers all work, so we should make it to space. But until this point, I didn't quite know, because I hadn't flown this vehicle before. So I was kind of relieved that we would in fact be going to space today. This was the moment of truth, creating the maneuver plan to see if I would have enough Delta V to do it, and I do, with a smidge to spare to perform a deorbit burn later on. Although I did kind of know ahead of time that it would be okay, because I can see our Delta V is 582, and our orbital speed is dropping actually because it's still in the atmosphere, so there's a bit of drag, but orbital velocity of Kerbin is 2,300 meters per second, so we have enough where we take those two numbers into consideration. So now we can just time warp up to Apogee and perform our circularization burn. Now, I take passenger confidentiality very seriously here at Kraken Slayer Industries, so that's why there are only 2 Kerbals visible in the Kerbal viewer there. It's not because I forgot to add passengers, it's because I wanted to protect their privacy, because after all, they paid a lot of money to be on this flight. I'm friends with the famous hacker 4chan, and they were able to edit the game files so they would hide the passengers for true customer confidentiality.
Hello again, esteemed guests. This is once again your captain speaking, just informing you that we have now reached a stable orbit, so you may leave your seats and freely float around to the cabin and admire the views.
And while the guests enjoy their trip around in Kerbin orbit, we're going to go ahead and load the quick save that I made right before I deployed the spaceplane so that we can fly the aircraft back to the Kerbal Space Center and pretend this is the canon sequence of events, where the spaceplane got to space and got to orbit safely, and also the carrier aircraft made it back to the Kerbal Space Center and didn't just crash and explode. Which is unfortunately the sad reality. But I'm going to go ahead and live my life in denial of this fact. So I'm just going to simulate the spaceplane taking off, just pointing at radial out. It's probably going to do a loop-de-loop, but we don't really care. At this point, though, I paused the game and I was like, oh, this is really nice. Take some little shots for Twitter and stuff. It was pretty nice. The camera's moving around really fast. Let's just crossfade across to the point where I unpaused and we can get back to flying the aircraft back to the runway, which is actually not that far away. It felt like I'd travelled a really long distance, but in fact I'm barely, I only got to 7 kilometers, right? So I guess we didn't travel that far. I guess it felt like a long way for me when I flew this mission because it took so long because the frame rate was really low. So it would have been a fairly quick flight for you guys watching it playing back at about 8 times faster than normal speed, but for me it was a bit longer than that. Now, look at this! I found a bug! I know, a bug in Kerbal Space Program 2. Say it ain't so! The fuel lines are still attached. You see the yellow fuel lines there? They did connect the Methalox tanks on the carrier to the Methalox tanks on the spaceplane, so that when I initially fired the Vector engine, it would pull the fuel from the aircraft rather than from its own fuel tanks. I don't know why, it just felt like the efficient thing to do. And they're still there, so maybe that's a bug that needs addressing. Though I think in the grand scheme of things, fairly low on the priority list. There are bigger bugs, I think, should be addressed sooner. And also the wobbliness, man. You probably saw the amount of struts I had to put on this thing to get it to not wobble too much. It's still very wobbly. It might even be more apparent for you guys because the footage is being played back at faster than normal speed, so it's easier to get a sense of just how wobbly it is. And yeah, it still remains a point of contention for me. Wobbly rockets are like really fun for like the first 5 minutes of playing the game, and then after that they are really, really annoying. And I think it's very telling that a large proportion of the player base on Reddit, Twitter and the forums recommend going into the game files and altering the joint rigidity value, and it's kind of disappointing that the developers obviously think that wobbly rockets are something that people wanted, because obviously the devs chose to set the rigidity at the value it is. So yeah, I think hopefully the overwhelmingly negative reception from players regarding the wobbliness will influence future updates regarding joint rigidity in Kerbal Space Program 2. And would you look at that, I've once again done the thing I didn't talk about, the important stuff on screen, but yeah, we landed the aircraft, so now we're back in space. And I noticed another bug. One of our control surfaces decides that it doesn't want to live on this space plane anymore and is floating off. We'll fix it in just a second. Right now I'm just going to orient the spaceplane in a nice prograde facing position. I just want the guests to be as uncomfortable as possible, apparently. If they're floating around the cabin, they've just been slammed into the ceiling or floor. But now I've just done a quick save, quick load to try and fix the drifting control surface, and it sort of fixed the issue. But now the other one is not attached properly anymore. So, it's like the amount of separation is less than it was before. So I'm going to just take this as a win, which, as you can see, made the Kraken most displeased. Getting out on EVA sometimes would start making the ship... I don't want to say that make the ship roll, because it also influenced our orbital velocity. So I wasn't quite sure what was happening. I really wanted to get both of our pilot Kerbals. Obviously, we have guests on board as well, guys. Shh. I wanted to get both of our pilot Kerbals out on EVA to get a nice, cool screenshot and just, I don't know, just generally admire the view. But I just couldn't. The ship would either go into a roll and start changing its velocity, and whenever that kind of roll thing happened, the other Kerbal that was on EVA, the jetpack would just stop working. So I'm going to just realize this in a second. I paused the game to make it easier to switch to. I love the paused unpaused feature, by the way. Not a fan of the glitch, obviously, the visual glitch, but I like the functionality of the thing. But yeah, the RCS pack just wasn't working. I deployed it by pressing R, but WASD, shift control, even J, K, L, and I didn't do anything. So completely unresponsive. So a bit of a weird glitch. So I tried for a little while. I'm not going to show you all of my attempts to get the EVA to work, but yeah. I do like the feature that's currently on screen, the magnetic boots of the Kerbal. Unless this is a glitch, it's not supposed to be this way, but it's a glitch that actually it works well, and I hope it stays, where the Kerbals got like magnetic boots so they can walk along the surfaces of space stations and things like that. I'm guessing this is an intended thing, so when we have colonies and like giant space stations like the ones we saw in the initial trailers, makes it easier for Kerbals to navigate. And then yeah, Kerbal jumped off and drifted away, and the RCS pack didn't respond to any inputs again, so I quick loaded and decided to just not bother to continue trying to get both Kerbals on EVA. We'll just time warp now so we can do a few victory laps of Kerbin. We promised our esteemed guests the flight would be 5 hours and 45 minutes. We're going to spend some time in orbit, not only so the guests can get their money's worth, but also so we can wait for the Kerbal Space Center to be on the daylight side of the planet so we can land in the day. So it's a bit more visually interesting for you guys, the audience, which of course meant I had to go back to the Kerbal Space Center, launch a craft, leave it on the launch pad, and while still controlling that craft, go to the tracking station. So I had all of the extra time warps available to me, so we could go nice and quickly. Here you can see me doing all of that. We can see our space plane whizzing around the planet, and now the Space Center is well and truly on the daylight side of Kerbin. So we can go back to our space plane now and to continue with the mission. So we currently have 165 meters per second of delta V remaining, which is plenty to perform a deorbit. So far, I've had the most success with doing deorbits from low Kerbin orbit and landing at the Kerbal Space Center by placing our orbital line just to the east of the little landmass that sits to the east of the KSC. You can probably see what I meant. Well, it's gone now, but on the map screen, you probably saw where I put my orbital line. You'll see that again once I'm doing my deorbit burn, because I'll be using the map screen to get a guide of kind of when I need to stop. So there we are. There you go. That's where I've aimed that's where I've aimed for, basically. And then we can point ourselves prograde and get ready for re-entry. One thing I did decide to do was the wiggling of the vector engine was annoying me, so I just opened the parts manager and disabled the gimbal of the vector just to make kind of look a little bit less goofy upon re-entry.
Hello esteemed guests, this is your captain speaking. We've successfully completed our deorbit burn and have now started our descent procedure into the atmosphere towards the Kraken Slayer Industries Space Center. We expect total descent time to be approximately 7 minutes, as scheduled. If you want to adjust your watch, then feel free to do so. However, the local time of our destination is the same as the local time of our departure location, because it's the same runway. For your own safety, we kindly ask that you keep your seatbelts fastened for the duration of the descent, as over the course of this flight I've drunk approximately 78 centilitres of vodka, and I'm a little bit drunk. So I would anticipate some erratic flight manoeuvres performed far too late in order to ensure that we don't overshoot our destination. We wish you a pleasant descent, and we hope to see you again very soon. On behalf of all of our crew, thank you for choosing Kraken Slayer Industries as your airline today, and we gently remind you that we do not offer refunds ever at all for any reason.
But there is the Kerbal Space Center looming into view just there. Let's see our check in on the two pilots. There they are. And they are loving it. And I do like how the Kerbals react to your inputs. You might have noticed in a lot of my other KSP2 videos, whenever the rockets have been wobbling or like turning, you can see them there. They actually react dynamically to what the craft is doing, which is just such a nice touch. There's so many nice little things in Kerbal Space Program 2, and I really, really am super excited to see what the future holds for this game, because I know right now it's a bit of a beautiful mess, isn't it? But the devs are diligently taking on board everyone's feedback and are actively making fixes, and their vision for the game is so great, and I think seeing what's to come on the roadmap, There's a lot of good things in store for Kerbal Space Program 2. And in a way, I think early access release has been very good. For example, hopefully the devs now know that wobbly rockets, people don't like that, so that won't be in the final release, hopefully. Little things like that. I think early access is really going to help steer the game's development in a positive way. Look at that, we have touched down, thus bringing an end to this mission.
Hello esteemed guests, this is your captain speaking. Kraken Slayer Industries welcomes you back. For your safety and those around you, please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened and keep the aisle clear until we are parked at the gate. Today's flight was made possible thanks to our supporters on Patreon and our YouTube membership program, and if you'd like to sign up to either of these, then you can follow the links in the description. And if you want to watch some entertaining videos during our taxi back to the gate, then there are now 2 clickable cards on your screens. Both are videos from our channel that we think you'll like. Please check around your seat for any personal belongings you may have brought on board with you. And on behalf of Kraken Slayer Airlines, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this trip, and we're looking forward to seeing you on board again in the near future.